Welcome to Cultivate, a Veritas Academy podcast, where we explore truth, beauty, and goodness through meaningful conversation. We invite you to join us in discussions meant to edify your mind, encourage your heart, and equip your family to live abundantly in Christ.
Hi, everybody. This is Ty Fischer. We know that you need your Cultivate fix over the summer. We're not putting out regular podcasts, but we wanted to every once in a while just whet your appetite, get you ready for the next season. So we went back and we picked some of the best. And this one with David Bahnsen on teaching your children the dignity of work is one of my personal favorites. David Bahnsen is just a wonderful Christian teacher on economics. He manages billions and billions of dollars, and he has thought so deeply about how work is connected to dignity that I think you're really going to enjoy this Flashback Season 2 podcast. Today, I have on the line with me David Bahnsen. David he's my favorite economist, which everyone should have a favorite economist. But the thing that I really like about David is that he is an economist that can talk about the economy in the Garden of Eden and in heaven. So we'll touch upon that a little bit. But I got to know David. He came to speak at an event here at Veritas, and it was just fascinating. It was a wonderful event, and was so gracious to answer questions for us. He's the head of the Bahnsen Group, which is an investment company that he manages the Bahnsen Group manages over $3 billion in assets. That's right, David, isn't it?
We just passed $4 billion, as a matter of fact.
$4 billion. I feel like it's breaking news then. $4 billion in assets. Yeah. And he can talk about theology. He can talk about work. His best-selling book, There Is No Free Lunch. Or am I botching the title?
Yeah, no, there's no free lunch. 250 economic truths.
Yeah. And what I really appreciate about his Dividend Cafe podcast, which I've become a fan of, is David can take very complicated economic ideas and make them simple enough that I can understand them, which that's just fascinating to me when you're able to do that. So I'm just so thankful to have you here today, David.
Well, I'm thankful to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. So what is your calling? How did you get into investing? Because, I mean, you come from a rather famous theological family, right?
Well, in a lot of ways, I tell people that I think the family I came from, the background that I have theologically and philosophically, is the reason I got into finance. And it sort of surprises people because I think they believe intuitively, if someone comes from a family where, in my case, my late father was an ordained minister, he was a Christian intellectual, he was a professor. And so if you think, well, yeah, that led me into my path, then it sounds like a path that would be in academia or ministry. And yet my path into finance came about as a result of the things I was taught theologically and the things I was taught philosophically about the lordship of Christ, about the creation mandate, about our citizenship, and what that means in terms of our earthly responsibility. And I believe that the world of finance, the capital markets that are so incredibly important to funding the various projects of growth and productivity that enhance our quality of life, that give us opportunity for dominion and for serving the needs of humanity. I think that the financial markets I work in are a huge part of the Christian field, if you will, for dominion, for the lordship of Christ. And these were things I learned from my late father. So I connect the dots that way, Ty, in terms of my background.
Well, that makes sense. And so I wanted to just ask you, one of the things that's really impressive about David is he's one of the most productive people I know. It seems like, and maybe it's just that I choose television shows, not very many, or I choose them wisely, because every time I turn on the TV, it seems like you're on there on Fox News or on Fox Business, or every Monday I get to hear a little bit about economics from the world and everything in it. And your podcast is a regular visitor to my phone. So it seems like you're working really, really hard. And then when I go on your website, there's this list of books that you've read, and it's really impressive as well. What are the keys to your productivity?
Well, I don't think I'll have to reference my late father in every answer I give today, but this one also requires that my dad was an incredibly productive person and a very disciplined person, and so I'm blessed to have had a model for certain habits. And also, one of the things I inherited from him was the need for sleep that is a little less than I guess some people get by. And I think about that a lot because I actually don't take for granted it would be a very different productivity if I needed a few more hours of sleep than I do. But my dad was a incredibly early riser, and I'm a very early riser, and I try to get more done from 3:45 in the morning till 7 in the morning than most people would get done in a day, and those early mornings are a huge part of it. But you referenced the podcast and the writing and the TV appearances, and honestly, those things all put together, soaking wet, aren't but a few hours a week. I was smart enough at some point to build out a really great studio in my office in Newport. We have a smaller studio in my office in New York. And so when I'm doing television, I can just walk down the hallway, sit in a chair. They put a microphone in my lapel, and I can start talking, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time. The things that really require a lot of time are research, our deliberation, our running the business, meeting with clients. And that's a time-intensive element, but it's the life I chose, the life God chose for me. And I have a wife who supports it. And that's another element that I should never ignore.
Yeah.
I don't take for granted that my wife's support enables me to be more productive than I'd otherwise be.
Yeah. So when you were here for the event that evening, I left that event, went to the Newark airport, and flew out the next morning to California. And I told my wife I did a Bahnsen, because I feel like whenever you're on the podcast, I'd never know whether you're going to be in California or New York, and you move back and forth, and then to other places sometimes. So that's the only Bahnsen I've ever been able to do. The get on the plane and get to California first thing in the morning. So,
well, hopefully you found the time in the air cathartic, because there's something about not being interrupted for a 5-hour flight across country that can actually be quite productive and rewarding.
Well, yeah, that is true. That time, flying those nonstop flights that are a number of hours, that is some really productive time. So yeah. Well, you've mentioned you've mentioned your father, and I'm going to have to. He's a popular guy here at Veritas. In fact, our former apologetics teacher was our tech guy. So at some points, your father's name, the last name Bahnsen, has been part of our passwords here at Veritas Academy. No longer. That's why I can mention it on the air. But
yeah,
how was he? We see now so many children of well-known Christians who really sometimes struggle with their faith, or sometimes just walk away from the faith. How did your parents really encourage your faith as you were growing up?
Well, look, my dad was a very covenantally minded guy. He believed very strongly in raising us, not just to live like Christians, but to think like Christians. He thought those two things were part and parcel of one another. So not only was I raised in a Christian home and was churched, catechized, but I also went through Christian school my entire life. From K through 12, I was always in Christian school, and so there was both academic and spiritual, moral influences, examples around me, and I'm very appreciative of that. I think that you're right. There are a lot of people raised in Christian homes, A's as they call us, preachers' kids. There is a certain reputation, tragically, for a lot who don't necessarily all stay in the faith. One thing I'd say, if it's encouraging covenantally, is I've seen a lot of people who were peers of mine when I was younger who walked away from the faith and came back.
Yeah.
And came back. And I think that's part of the covenantal promises too. You know, I've had struggles, challenges in my life. I haven't lived a perfectly faithful life either, but there's something about the prodigal, you know, concept, that covenant, when we're raised a certain way and being able to come back around, I think it's how God deals with us at times. Yeah. And so it's His grace.
When the prodigal comes to his senses, he remembers the character of his father. So that's the thing that calls him home. So when you were here, you talked a little bit about the dignity of work. Now, I grew up on a farm, and when you're living on a farm, you learn about the dignity of work because everybody's out working outside. So I have these weird experiences, or used to. My parents don't live on the farm anymore. I would go home, and because my relationship with my dad was not a talking relationship as much as it was a working relationship. So I would go on vacation so I could work with my dad. And I remember once I was shoveling gravel along with a hired hand that he had who was getting paid to shovel it. And it was the most humid day of the year. And I was sitting there shoveling this gravel, and I thought to myself, you're an idiot. You know, you're here shoveling gravel on the hottest day of the year. And this other guy just kept taking breaks. And as I was going along, I finally realized I'm shoveling gravel because I love my dad. And then I thought, and I'm also going to inherit this place as well. So that's good too. But how did your parents teach you the dignity of work when you were growing up? And how have you tried to take those lessons that you were talking about, that you talked about when you were here on the Leadership Circle reception? How are you trying to help your kids discover the joy and dignity of work?
Well, I think that there were a couple of things that were really important to me growing up, and one of them was similar to what you described, but it was probably more secondary for me. And what would be a surprise to my dad is what was primary. The notion that we did a lot of yard work and chores, and that when the church was moving locations, we would become free volunteers to go move chairs and furniture and line up, do an assembly line of manual labor for the day. Those things were a grind, and we had to kind of do it with a little less grumbling than we tried to get away with, that kind of stuff. And that's a big lesson, and it's a good lesson. But I'll tell you what I believe is one of my fondest memories, which is not standing in line doing hard physical labor on a Saturday. It was waking up and seeing my dad in his study in front of his computer working at 5 a.m. and seeing the joy he got from working, from being in his office reading, from writing, when he would go speak, you know, that's what he did. And it was just having it modeled, his organization, the real sense of satisfaction he got in his own career, which again was more of what people like to call, in a sort of dualistic mindset, unfortunately, ministry. And I don't really believe in that sacred secular distinction, but even regardless of whether you want to call it ministry or pastoral, it was his career and he loved it and he worked hard at it, and I saw it. And so I really do hope and pray that my 3 kids, they have witnessed me at 5 a.m. and earlier than that, sitting in my study working their whole lives. And I brought them in my office on Saturdays, and they would come and play and watch TV while I was in here getting everything done. And I hope those memories will serve as some positive reinforcement of the dignity of work, of the enjoyment, the satisfaction. And then I think the third piece is the actual teaching. You know, not telling someone this is a grind, you have to do it, man up and grab a shovel, but rather this is service. This is activity. This is productivity. This is calling. This is, you know, meeting other people's needs. There's a joy in it when we properly understand it. Well, and the reason most people that don't have joy in it is because they were not made to understand it.
Yeah, and we really, as a culture, you touched on this as well when you were out here, we as a culture are training people, especially in the way that we care for the poor and needy sometimes. We're training them away from seeing that kind of dignity and joy in work. And that's more than being an economic problem. That's a soul harming problem. That's a soul destroying problem.
And our culture is dealing with it right now. I think that the negative view of work, first of all, the negative view of work is reinforced through an excessively positive view of this idea of retirement. We have sort of codified in the culture with imagery, with pop culture, cinema, TV, marketing, that the whole kind of point of working is that you achieve a point at which you no longer need to work and your life begins a 30-year vacation. And then we have imagery of a boat cruise and mom and dad buying a vineyard and just sort of walking around a farm smiling, not having to do anything anymore. And at the beach or whatever the case may be. Well, I love the idea of people being financially independent. I like the idea of abundance and prosperity. I like the freedom to spend more time with grandkids and take nicer vacations. I'm all for all of that. But the celebration of inactivity is itself the inversion of work. It is celebrating the idea of one ceasing to do what we were created to do.
Yeah.
And I think that there needs to be an end to this imagery of work as drudgery, because it isn't true.
Yeah, and to bring that into the realm of classical Christian education, that's one of the things that we look at here at Veritas. That a lot of and this is not true of everybody that's involved in a classical Christian school, but in private education, one of the things that you know is that most of the families that are in private education can afford a private education. And these kids typically have wonderful, loving, supportive families that protect them from everything, sometimes pain and discomfort that would even be good for them. So how do we work on keeping kids away from that sense of entitlement and giving them a heart to run after glory, to attempt things that are hard and to fail, to get up, to dust themselves off and to get back to work? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I believe in everything you're saying wholeheartedly, and I really wish there was an easier way to teach it, because I'm convinced that the only way to teach it is difficult. It's through modeling it. It's through example. A lot of parents have financial struggles and professional struggles, and they feel that their job is to insulate their kids from it and protect them. And there's a certain truth to it. A 5-year-old's not going to have the mental, capacity for processing, dad losing his job or mom getting demoted or some kind of a career thing that is, going to make them feel vulnerable. But I think there's a point at which, appropriate to their age and maturity, conversations about the reality of one's own career struggles, the peaks and valleys, the challenges, but then in their own lives, whether it's sports, friendships, relationships, academic. The high school that I'm a part of out in Southern California, we talk about kids learning how to fail forward. And I'm not sure if that's language that you guys use at Veritas or not, but I love this idea of kids understanding that you're going to have failures, you're going to have setbacks. And we want to teach you how to do that in a way that pushes you forward.
Sure.
Not backward, not wallowing, not self-pity, not it becoming a negative feedback loop, a vicious cycle where one failure leads to more failures because you don't learn from it, you become defeated. That we want there to be a sort of attitude and spirit of victory, which is a boldness that you find all throughout Scripture. And yet people have to learn that through the disappointments of life.
Yeah, and it's amazing when you're going through those times. A lot of times, I don't see all that I'm learning, but when things calm down, then you see that some of the times that have prepared you the most for the best things that you do or enjoy doing are really those times when, looking back at them, you would call them, dark times or failures. So that's wonderful. Now, I wanted to let our listeners know that recently you created a free online course in economics that people can watch at www.bahnsen, that's BAHNSEN.com, and economics-course. So why did you do this? And does this in some ways mean that there is really a free lunch out there at one point?
Well, I was gonna beat you to it because the joke is widely disseminated. When I'm putting a course online for free or give my book out at times, they'll say, "Well, I thought there's no free lunch." But of course, I have to remind people, because it was free to them doesn't mean it was free to me. And so there's still no free lunch. It's just a matter of who's picking up the check. And in this case, it was an investment I was very willing to make because I believed in this message so much. And I had the advantage of the hardest part of the work, which was not professionally recording all of the lectures, even though that was laborious. The hardest part was organizing and creating and preparing the material. And I had done that in real life through a semester-long course I taught at the aforementioned Pacifica Christian High School here in Newport Beach, California. So having done that, I decided to convert it into a program that could be made available. I think you and I know there are homeschool students and classical school students that in 8th grade could handle upperclassmen high school level material. And I think this introduction to economics is one of those things. And then we've already had thousands of adults sign up that are not students, not middle school or high school or college. They're just in their 40s or in their 60s. They're wanting to take it for their own edification. And I think it's age appropriate for them as well. And so the idea is to have the lectures. It's connected to a syllabus with links to all the kind of additional reading materials and videos to watch. We provide the quizzes and the final exam, the essay prompts. And it's meant to just sort of be an incubated, fully packaged, one semester intro to economics. And I think that people will be surprised by it, Ty, because a lot of people want to sign up for economics and figure they're going to learn some mathematical laws that are going to make them financially more savvy, or they're going to kind of pick up on some of the more complexity of the numbers that go into econ. And I avoid all of that. You got to learn that stuff at some point. There's laws of supply and demand and of marginal utility and other things that we think of as more traditionally oriented econometrics, if you will. I don't want people to learn that until they've learned the anthropology of economics, meaning the centrality of the human person in God's design for how we allocate scarcity. And that's what economics fundamentally is. It's the human person allocating the scarce resources that God has created.
And Christians don't understand economics often. How does that impoverish the church? And how would having our pastors and elders and teachers and just husbands and wives in the church having a better understanding of economics, how would that help Christ's kingdom here in America and across the world?
The reason I think it would have a profound impact on Christ's kingdom, on our service to others, on limiting the amount of desperation and alienation and purposelessness that so much of the church and society is plagued with right now, is because of what I believe economics truly is. That if we understood economics as more than merely the math and science that we need, the knobs we need to turn to somehow come up with this masterfully central planned recipe for economic administration and for public policy. If we understand it to be at its core about the telos of humanity, what our purpose is, what God made us for, then I believe it provides the affirmative moral defense against the claim of the central planners, the socialists, the Marxists, the progressives, that want to claim that a free enterprise system is rooted in greed, but their system of confiscation, inefficient allocation of capital, that their system is morally superior. We have been fighting as advocates of free enterprise what is sometimes awfully called capitalism. I think it's a terrible term, But when we refer to capitalism, we have been content to argue for it on the basis of how better it is at efficiency, how superior it is at allocating resources and being an arbiter of risk and reward. And it most certainly is those things. But we have implicitly said the moral aspect is secondary. Your idea of wanting to redistribute wealth and a greater social safety net and greater governmental intervention into the economy, there may be some real tremendous moral intent there and moral impact. But no, it isn't as effective. Well, in fact, the fact of the matter is that we have to begin arguing for the supremacy of our position morally, that it is rooted in God's design for humanity, that it is rooted in a higher view of a human person, a greater regard for their dignity, that we treat all people as producers, that we treat all people as capable individuals made with agency, not requiring a disinterested third party to make economic decisions for them. It's insulting, it's offensive, and it's offensive because God did not create us to be wards of the state, either in servitude or as a mere object of other people's largesse, but also as decision makers. This notion of the anointed central planning intelligentsia, that's what economics needs to break down, is why economics is about incentives. And people without incentives can't make optimal decisions. That there is limited knowledge for the central planners at trying to guide the affairs of others. So if the church understood this, Ty, they would not have to default to a heavy view of governmental administration to solve poverty. See, it's tempting to do so because we all want to solve for poverty.
Sure, yes.
But if we realize that poverty is solved by people producing more than they consume, then it allows us to economically have a solution that honors mankind's dignity.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have an elective here that's a robotics elective, and when we pray before class, I've been there the last few times, and when we pray recognizing that God is a creator, and He made us in His image to be creators, and now that's what we're going to do here in this class. So in the same way, He made us to be producers. He made us to bear His image, and children should be acting like their fathers. So that seems so simple when you say it, but it's so many times, even in the Christian church, we're actually trying to relieve people from the need or the dignity that they would have as a producer instead of really looking for those opportunities. So you said that economics basically was the way that a market economy deals with this idea of scarcity. One of the things you talked about when you were out here that was just fascinating to me was the idea of scarcity in heaven. So, and I put that down in my notes here, basically because I wanted to make sure I heard you right. So explain what the economics of heaven look like.
Well, this is where the theology of this stuff becomes very important, because I think it's not only inaccurate, but it's a little bit lazy when people will say, we were made into Edenic conditions, which is true, and then sin came, and now we have a struggle in work. Well, okay, but let's unpack it more. What else do we know about the pre-fall garden? Because that's going to help us answer your question about heaven, right? If we believe that heaven is the celestial city fulfillment of the pre-sin Garden of Eden, mm-hmm. What do we know about Garden of Eden? Well, before sin, it is true that there was not misery, there was not the conditions of sinfulness that we think of in a post-fall world, but there was scarcity.
Yep.
There was not unlimited fruits and vegetation. There was a need to name the animals. There was not an eternal supply of individual animals. And it was a garden. is what my friend Father Sirico at the Acton Institute refers to as a place of vulnerability. Now, post-fall, that vulnerability took on an entirely different context, because now the human person was subject to death, was subject to a lot of worse things in a post-fall climate. But I believe that scarcity was part of creation, and scarcity just took on the curse of sin after the fall. But will there be unlimited supplies of goods and services in heaven? Well, there wasn't in the Garden of Eden. So to me, this is an economic reality of creation. And why did God ask us to steward the earth if it didn't require stewardship?
Yeah.
But no limitations of scarcity would mean it didn't need stewardship.
Yeah.
But that's Genesis 1. That wasn't Genesis 2 or Genesis 3. That was Genesis 1. And so stewardship, cultivation, these are the elements of the creation mandate fundamental to why God made us and what God made us for. And I believe this is part of our eternal destiny.
And isn't it wonderful to think about that time in heaven where maybe we'll wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, but there won't be the curse on our labor. So that everything will move smoothly. It'll just be every day of work will be blessed, and you won't ever have those days where you feel like you just like to call it in for the day.
That's exactly right. And I think, think about the economic productivity, because how much unproductivity results from distrust?
Yes.
Right? How much extra lawyering do we have to do? And we have to do it in a fallen world, right? You want responsible deal making, you want legal protections, and we have to legally button things up. But we pretty much only have to do most of that because of sin.
That's right.
Because people break their word. Yeah, and we don't have to do that in heaven. And so when you eliminate so much of the bureaucracy that is necessary in the fall, let alone the other stuff you're talking about, which is also important, the anxiety that comes with it, the distress, the grind. There's a lot of elements of the curse that will be gone. But I would tell people, what a promise to think of economic productivity that is not burdened by the reality of sin.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and hey, when you were out here, you let us know how big a USC fan that you are, and now I can welcome you to the Big Ten. So there you go.
Yes, I can't wait. We gotta get through these next couple of years. But it's funny, I have a lot of Big Ten friends that hoard it over like I'm supposed to be afraid to be joining the Big Ten, and I have to remind them, you're not going to find a Big Ten school we don't have a lifetime winning record against. So I'm really quite excited to play Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State more often. It's going to be fun.
Well, and we're really excited that we can have an excuse to travel to sunny Southern California from time to time, and we'd like to apologize in advance for the Midwestern and Eastern weather that you're going to be playing in there now that you'll be off the coast. So.
No, I appreciate it, but what I always tell people is we like the opportunity, we welcome the opportunity to go to that East Coast and Midwestern winter, because it gets very boring being in perfect paradise weather all the time.
Yeah, no lack of perfect paradise weather there in Los Angeles, I'll tell you that. Just one last question as a curiosity. Have you read Peter Zion's books? The Disunited Nations and The End of the World is Only the Beginning, I think, is his most recent one.
Yeah, that's the most recent. I have not read any of his books other than that last one, which is the one that just came out this year. And I was not really familiar with him until his new book. Then I read that book in one weekend, and it does have a good buzz about it now, and so I became more familiar with it. And I think there were a lot of really great revelations in the book. I think there's a lot of astute points and observations he makes. I would not agree with all of his conclusions. I think there are certain things, this happens a lot when people are in the business of identifying problems, is you write a book to point out a problem and to point out where that unchecked problem would lead. But what that misses is the fact that very often unchecked problems do get checked.
Yeah.
They do get rectified, and he doesn't deal with some of the things that could positively intervene in some of these negative global forces. And so I would have a bit more sanguine view on some of the things he addresses than he does, but he's a good writer. It was a good book.
Yeah. So, David, thank you so much for the conversation today, and just pray that God blesses that economics course, and that we have more and more young people and adults who understand economics to the glory of God.
Well, Ty, thank you for having me. Thank you for those kind words, that strong encouragement. And let me just say thank you for what you're doing at Veritas. The school is amazing, impacting a lot of people. And these bottom-up, local, community efforts, they're going to change the world. I'm grateful for what you all are doing.
Well, thank you very much, David.
You've been listening to Cultivate, the podcast of Veritas Academy, a preschool through 12th grade classical Christian school in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. If you'd like to learn more about Veritas, visit veritasacademy.com to discover the truth, beauty, and goodness of classical Christian education.